and a captured Apache warrior's son and a kidnapped white woman are forced into the same tent. Destiny ties their fates together in ways neither could imagine. What secret could turn enemies into allies and captives into something far more powerful? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains as Thomas Blackwell rode his chestnut mare across the arid landscape. The year was 1876, and the tensions between settlers and Native American tribes had reached a boiling point in this untamed corner of the American frontier. Thomas, a former Army scout with weathered features and observant blue eyes, had left military service behind to work as a translator and mediator between the Apache tribes and the U.S. government. "Come on, girl," he murmured to his horse as they crested a ridge overlooking a sprawling valley. Not much farther now. In the distance, Thomas could make out the thin wisps of smoke rising from an Apache encampment. He had received word that Chief Running Bear of the Chiricahua Apache was willing to discuss terms of peace. As someone who understood both worlds, Thomas was often called upon for such delicate missions. What Thomas didn't know was that fate had set another wheel in motion. Just 3 miles east, a stagecoach rattled along the rough trail carrying Sarah Montgomery, a young schoolteacher from Boston who had accepted a position at the new settlement of Willow Creek. Inside the coach, Sarah clutched her small leather-bound journal, recording her impressions of the wild territory. "The landscape here possesses a harsh beauty unlike anything I've witnessed back east," she wrote, pausing to steady herself as the coach hit a particularly nasty bump. "Mother warned this journey was foolhardy for a woman alone, but I remain convinced that education will help bridge the divide between our peoples." Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion. The coach jerked violently, and the driver's panicked shouts were followed by the thundering of hooves. Before she could comprehend what was happening, the door was wrenched open, and she found herself staring into the fierce eyes of a warrior whose face was streaked with red and black paint. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. "I mean no harm." The warrior responded in a language she couldn't understand, roughly pulling her from the coach. Sarah caught glimpses of the driver and the guard lying motionless on the ground, their blood staining the dusty earth. Terror gripped her heart as she was bound and thrown across a horse. As the war party rode away with their captive, Thomas arrived at the Apache camp, unaware of the raid that had just taken place. He was met with suspicious stares as he approached Chief Running Bear's tent. "I come in peace," Thomas said in the Apache tongue, raising his empty hands. "I bring words from the white man's government." Running Bear, a dignified elder with deep lines etched into his copper face, nodded solemnly. "The white man's words are like the wind. They change direction with each season. This time is different," Thomas insisted, though doubt nagged at him. He had seen too many broken promises on both sides. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of the war party. Thomas stepped outside and froze when he saw the young woman being dragged from a horse, her elegant dress torn and dirty, her honey blonde hair falling loose from its pins. "What is this?" he demanded, turning to Running Bear. "This was not part of our agreement." The chief's expression darkened. "This is not my doing. Yellow Wolf and his braves act against my wishes." Yellow Wolf, a muscular warrior with a scar running down his cheek, spat on the ground near Thomas's feet. "The white translator speaks with a forked tongue. While he talks of peace, soldiers burn our villages and steal our children." Thomas recognized the dangerous situation unfolding. Yellow Wolf was the chief's son, and there had been rumors he was gathering support to overthrow his father, whom he considered too willing to negotiate with the white settlers. Sarah, despite her terror, stood as tall as her bound hands would allow. "I am a teacher," she said clearly. "I have come to help children learn, all children." Her courage impressed Thomas, who stepped forward. "This woman is innocent. Let her go, and I will ensure your grievances are heard." Yellow Wolf laughed harshly. "You both will stay as our prisoners. When the army comes looking, they will find you have joined us, or died with us." Thomas and Sarah were forced into a small tent at the edge of the camp, guards posted outside. As darkness fell, they spoke in hushed tones. "I'm Thomas Blackwell," he introduced himself, working at the ropes binding his wrists. I was sent to negotiate with Chief Running Bear, Sarah Montgomery, she replied, her voice steadier than he expected. I was traveling to Willow Creek to teach at the new school. She paused, studying his face in the dim light. You understand their language? Thomas nodded. I lived among the Apache for 2 years as a boy. My parents were killed in a raid, but instead of killing me, an Apache woman named Morning Dove took me in. I learned their ways before the army found me and brought me back to civilization. That's why you became a translator, Sarah realized. You see both sides. For all the good it's done, Thomas replied bitterly. Yellow Wolf plans to use us to provoke a military response. He wants war, not peace. Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then we must escape before that happens. Thomas looked at her with newfound respect. This Boston schoolteacher had more spine than many frontier men he'd known. First, we need to understand the camp layout, he murmured. And we need allies. Running Bear wants peace, but he's losing control to his son. As they spoke, planning in hushed tones, neither realized how their fates had become intertwined, nor how their shared ordeal would forge a bond between them stronger than either could imagine. Dawn broke over the Apache camp, painting the surrounding mountains in hues of gold and amber. Inside their prison tent, Thomas and Sarah had managed to loosen their bonds enough to restore circulation, but escape still seemed a distant possibility with guards posted just outside. Yellow Wolf will meet with his warriors at midday, Thomas whispered, having overheard conversations through the thin walls of the tent. That might give us an opportunity to speak with Running Bear. Sarah nodded, her honey-blonde hair now tied back with a strip of fabric torn from her petticoat. The refined schoolteacher was adapting to their dire circumstances with remarkable resilience. How will we get past the guards? She asked practically. Before Thomas could answer, the tent flap opened, and an elderly Apache woman entered carrying a clay pot of water and some dried meat. Her weathered face was impassive, but Thomas noticed something familiar in her dark eyes. Morning Dove? He ventured in Apache, hardly daring to believe. The old woman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She set down the provisions and responded softly. The boy who was called Little Hawk has returned with the white eyes. You know her? Sarah whispered. Thomas nodded, emotion tightening his throat. She raised me after my parents were killed. Morning Dove, we need your help. Yellow Wolf plans to use us to start a war. The old woman glanced over her shoulder at the guards outside. Running Bear grows weak. His son's voice becomes the voice of the tribe. She hesitated, then added, but not all follow Yellow Wolf willingly. She left without another word, but Thomas's heart had lightened considerably. We may have found our ally, he told Sarah. Throughout the morning, they observed the camp's rhythms through small gaps in the tent. Children played, women prepared food, and warriors gathered in small groups, their expressions grim. The atmosphere was tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. The tribe is divided, Thomas explained. Running Bear and the older generation remember the cost of war. Yellow Wolf and the younger warriors see only the continuing encroachment of white settlers on their lands. Sarah's face reflected her understanding. It's no different in Washington. Some call for extermination of the Indian problem, while others seek peaceful solutions. She sighed. I came west believing education could build bridges of understanding. A noble goal, Thomas said with a sad smile. But it takes more than books to heal generations of bloodshed. Their conversation was interrupted when Yellow Wolf himself entered their tent, flanked by 2 warriors. His imposing presence filled the small space as he studied them with undisguised contempt. The army searches for you, he stated flatly to Thomas. Soon they will find this camp. Then release us, Thomas replied evenly. Avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Yellow Wolf's scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. Blood has already been shed. Your stagecoach driver, the guard. Their scalps now hang from our warriors' belts. Sarah paled but maintained her composure. More death won't restore your lands or bring justice. The Apache warrior turned his fierce gaze on her. The white woman speaks bravely for one so far from home. He stepped closer, studying her face. Perhaps you will make a suitable wife for a warrior after you've learned proper submission. Thomas tensed, ready to intervene despite his bonds, but Sarah held Yellow Wolf's gaze without flinching. I submit to no man, white or Apache. A dangerous silence followed before Yellow Wolf laughed harshly. We shall see. He turned to leave, then paused. Tonight we decide your fate. Pray to your white man's God that it is quick. After he departed, Sarah released a shuddering breath. He means to kill us, doesn't he? Or use us as hostages, Thomas confirmed grimly. Either way, we need to act soon. As the sun climbed higher, the camp's activity increased. Thomas recognized preparations for a council meeting. Warriors adorned themselves with paint and feathers, while elders gathered near the central fire pit. Midday arrived with unexpected opportunity. Most of the camp had assembled for Yellow Wolf's council, leaving only a single guard at their tent. When the flap opened again, they expected to see Morning Dove with their meager daily rations. Instead, a young Apache girl of perhaps 10 years slipped inside, her quick eyes darting nervously. Little bird, she introduced herself in halting English. Morning Dove sends me. You come now. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances of surprise and hope. The guard? Thomas asked in Apache. Little bird smiled mischievously. He sleeps. My grandfather's special tobacco. Working quickly, the girl used a small bone knife to cut their bonds. Thomas rubbed his chafed wrists, then peered outside. True to the girl's word, the guard was slumped against a nearby tree, his chin resting on his chest. We must hurry, Little Bird insisted. This way. They crept behind the row of tents, using the gathering at the council fire as cover. Little Bird led them to a small stream at the edge of the camp where Morning Dove waited with 2 ponies. Little Hawk, the old woman greeted Thomas, her eyes soft with memory. These ponies will carry you to the eastern ridge. Follow the stream north until you reach the trading post. Thomas embraced her briefly. Come with us. Yellow Wolf will know you helped us escape. Morning Dove shook her head. My place is here with my people. Running Bear needs those loyal to him now more than ever. Sarah approached the elderly woman and took her weathered hands. Thank you for your courage, she said simply. As they mounted the ponies, Little Bird suddenly pointed toward the council. They come. Yellow Wolf sends warriors this way. Go! Morning Dove urged, pushing Thomas's pony toward the stream. With a last grateful look, Thomas and Sarah urged their mounts into the shallow water, riding northward as shouts of alarm rose behind them. The sound of pursuit was not far behind. Yellow Wolf had discovered their escape sooner than anticipated. They're coming! Sarah called, her voice nearly lost in the wind as their ponies galloped across the open terrain. Thomas surveyed the landscape with experienced eyes. There, he pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. We can lose them in those canyons. They rode hard, the ponies' hooves throwing up sprays of water as they followed the stream. Sarah clung to her mount with determination. Her years of riding in Boston parks poor preparation for this wild flight. Yet she matched Thomas's pace, her face set with grim resolve. The shouts behind them grew louder. Thomas glanced back to see a half-dozen mounted warriors in pursuit, Yellow Wolf at their lead, his face contorted with rage even at this distance. As they reached the mouth of the canyon, a rifle shot echoed across the landscape. Sarah's pony screamed and stumbled, throwing her to the ground. Thomas wheeled his mount around, heart in his throat as he saw her struggling to rise, her dress now stained with dirt and blood. Sarah, he cried, jumping from his pony and rushing to her side. Are you hurt? The horse, she gasped. Not me. Her pony lay thrashing on the ground, a bullet wound in its flank. Thomas helped Sarah to her feet and pulled her toward his own mount. We'll have to share, he said grimly, boosting her onto the pony's back before swinging up behind her. The delay had cost them precious time. As they urged the overburdened pony into the canyon, Yellow Wolf and his warriors were less than 200 yards behind. The narrow canyon walls rose around Thomas and Sarah like ancient sentinels, their reddish-brown surfaces streaked with black and amber. The single pony struggled beneath their combined weight. Its breathing labored as Thomas guided it through the twisting passages. They're still coming, Sarah warned, glancing over her shoulder. Thomas nodded grimly. This pony can't outrun them for long. We need to find a place to make a stand or hide. The canyon branched ahead, splitting into 3 separate passages. With only seconds to decide, Thomas guided their mount into the narrowest opening to the right. The passage wound upward, barely wide enough for the pony to navigate. If we're lucky, they'll split up to search, Thomas explained, his voice low against Sarah's ear. That improves our chances. Sure enough, the echoing sounds of pursuit suggested Yellow Wolf had divided his warriors among the different paths. But luck wasn't entirely with them. 2 sets of hoofbeats followed their chosen route. The narrow passage eventually opened into a small box canyon. Thomas cursed under his breath as he realized they had reached a dead end. Sheer rock walls surrounded them on 3 sides, rising at least 50 feet high. Quickly, he urged, helping Sarah dismount. Behind those boulders. They secured the pony behind a cluster of scrubby juniper trees and took cover among the massive rocks that littered the canyon floor. Thomas pulled his hunting knife, the only weapon he had, and prepared for the confrontation. If they find us, he told Sarah, run for that crevice in the far wall. It might lead to another passage. Sarah shook her head stubbornly. I won't leave you. Before Thomas could argue, 2 Apache warriors appeared at the canyon entrance. They dismounted cautiously, rifles ready as they scanned the enclosed space. Yellow Wolf will reward us for bringing back their scalps, one said in Apache, unaware Thomas could understand every word. Thomas squeezed Sarah's hand in warning as the warriors began to search methodically through the boulder field. They were running out of options and time. Just as discovery seemed inevitable, a distant cry echoed from the main canyon. The warriors paused, listening intently as the call was repeated. Yellow Wolf has found their trail elsewhere, the taller warrior concluded. Come. With obvious reluctance to abandon their search, the warriors mounted and rode back down the narrow passage. Thomas and Sarah remained motionless for several long minutes, hardly daring to breathe. That was too close, Sarah whispered finally. And too convenient, Thomas added, his brow furrowed. Why would Yellow Wolf call them away unless... A shadow fell across them as a figure appeared atop the boulder they were hiding behind. Unless I followed you myself, Yellow Wolf finished, aiming his rifle directly at Thomas's chest. Thomas instinctively pushed Sarah behind him as Yellow Wolf jumped down to confront them. The Apache warrior's face was painted for war, his dark eyes burning with hatred. The warriors searched the wrong trails while I tracked the true one, Yellow Wolf said with cold pride. Did you think I would not notice the signs? A pony carrying 2 riders leaves deeper tracks. Thomas kept his voice level, hoping to negotiate. Your father wants peace, Yellow Wolf. This path leads only to destruction for your people. My father is old and weak, Yellow Wolf spat. The time for talk is past. The white eyes understand only blood. And what will blood accomplish? Sarah stepped out from behind Thomas, her voice steady despite her fear. More soldiers will come. More Apache will die. Yellow Wolf studied her with grudging respect. The schoolteacher speaks truth, but it changes nothing. Our lands shrink each season. Our children starve. Better to die as warriors than wither slowly on the white man's reservations. There must be another way, Thomas insisted. There is none. Yellow Wolf raised his rifle again. Now you will... His words were cut short by the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. All 3 turned to see Chief Running Bear standing at the canyon entrance, flanked by 4 older warriors. My son, Running Bear said sadly, you dishonor our people with these actions. Yellow Wolf's face contorted with rage. You are the one who brings dishonor, father. You would have us surrender everything. I would have us survive, the chief corrected. The white man's soldiers outnumber the stars. We cannot defeat them with force. The standoff was tense, father and son facing each other across the rocky ground, their followers watching nervously. Thomas and Sarah remained still, understanding they were witnessing a pivotal moment for the Apache tribe. Yellow Wolf's hand tightened on his rifle. Step aside, father. Running Bear stood his ground. I cannot. For a terrible moment, Thomas thought the son might shoot his own father. Instead, Yellow Wolf lowered his weapon slightly, his expression torn between rage and respect. The council will decide, Running Bear announced. Until then, the prisoners remain unharmed. He nodded to Thomas. You once lived among us as Little Hawk. You understand our ways. Tell your army that we seek fair terms, not war. Before Thomas could respond, a new sound reached them. The rhythmic drumming of approaching hoofbeats, too many to count. All heads turned toward the canyon entrance as dust clouds rose in the distance. Soldiers, one of Running Bear's warriors warned. Yellow Wolf raised his rifle again, but his father placed a restraining hand on his arm. No. We return to camp, gather our people. If this is to be our last day, we meet it with dignity. The Apache departed quickly, leaving Thomas and Sarah alone in the box canyon. They climbed atop a boulder to watch as a cavalry detachment approached across the valley floor. "We've been saved," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Thomas wasn't so sure. Maybe. Or maybe we're about to witness a massacre. They retrieved their pony and made their way down to meet the cavalry. The unit was led by a young lieutenant named James Foster, who greeted Thomas like an old friend. "Blackwell, thank God you're alive. When we found the stagecoach," he glanced at Sarah with obvious relief. "Ma'am, we feared the worst when we discovered the bodies. The Apache have returned to their camp," Thomas explained quickly. "There's a chance for peaceful resolution, Lieutenant. Chief Running Bear wants to negotiate." Foster's expression hardened. "Negotiate? After they murdered 2 men and kidnapped you both? I have orders to punish those responsible." "The ones responsible were acting against their chief's wishes," Sarah interjected. "There are women and children in that camp, Lieutenant." "The situation is complicated," Thomas added. "If you attack now, you'll only prove Yellow Wolf right about white men's intentions." Foster hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and Thomas's counsel. "The colonel won't like it." "Then let me speak to the colonel," Thomas insisted. "Give me that chance before you start a war that neither side truly wants." The lieutenant signaled to his men to hold position. "You have until sunset, Blackwell. After that, I follow my orders." Thomas turned to Sarah. "You should go with them. You'll be safe at the fort." She shook her head firmly. "My place is with you. Those children in the camp, they're the reason I came west. To teach, to build understanding." Her blue eyes met his with determination. "Besides, Running Bear might listen to a woman. Yellow Wolf certainly didn't expect my defiance." Thomas couldn't help but smile at her courage. This Boston schoolteacher had revealed depths of strength he hadn't anticipated. "Very well. We go together." They mounted fresh horses provided by the cavalry and rode toward the Apache camp, aware that time was running short. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. "Do you think they'll listen?" Sarah asked as they rode side by side. Thomas gazed ahead thoughtfully. "Running Bear will. Yellow Wolf is the question mark. And if he refuses peace, then we've failed," Thomas admitted grimly. "And many will die needlessly." As they approached the camp, they were met by warriors who escorted them to the central fire pit. The entire tribe had gathered, faces solemn as they watched the white translator and schoolteacher dismount. Running Bear and Yellow Wolf sat opposite each other, their division symbolic of the tribe's internal conflict. Thomas stepped forward, speaking in Apache for all to hear. "The soldiers are nearby. They come seeking vengeance for the stagecoach attack." Murmurs spread through the gathered tribe as Running Bear rose. "What are their terms?" "They have none yet," Thomas replied honestly, "but I believe bloodshed can be avoided if we act quickly." Yellow Wolf stood as well, his hand resting on his knife. "More white man's lies. They come to kill us all." Sarah surprised everyone by addressing the tribe in halting Apache phrases Thomas had taught her during their ride. "I am a teacher. I came west to help all children learn. Apache children deserve the same opportunities as white children." Her simple declaration caused a stir among the women, particularly those with young ones clinging to their skirts. Even Yellow Wolf seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Running Bear stepped into the silence. "What do you propose, Little Hawk?" Thomas outlined his plan carefully. The tribe would release Sarah and him officially as a gesture of peace. In return, Thomas would negotiate with the army for fair treatment and better reservation conditions than those previously offered. "The White Eyes respect strength," Yellow Wolf argued. "They will see this as weakness." "They respect courage," Thomas countered, "and wisdom. It takes more courage to seek peace than to die in a battle you cannot win." As the Apache deliberated among themselves, Sarah moved closer to Thomas. "Will it work?" she whispered. He took her hand, drawing strength from her presence. "It has to." The fading sunlight bathed the Apache camp in golden hues as the tribe's council continued their heated deliberations. Thomas and Sarah waited anxiously, knowing that Lieutenant Foster's patience would not extend beyond sunset. Time was slipping away like sand through fingers. Running Bear raised his hand, silencing the debate. "We have heard all voices. Now we must decide." He turned to his son. "Yellow Wolf, you speak for the young warriors. What say you now?" All eyes turned to the scarred warrior. Yellow Wolf's face was impassive, but conflict raged behind his dark eyes. He looked from his father to Thomas and Sarah, then to the women and children of the tribe. "The white teacher speaks of opportunities for our children," he said finally. "What opportunities will they have if they are dead, or if they grow up orphaned as Little Hawk did?" He straightened his shoulders. "I still believe the white man's promises are worth less than dust, but I will not lead our people to slaughter when another path exists." A collective sigh of relief passed through the gathering. Running Bear nodded with dignity. "Then we are agreed. Little Hawk and the teacher will return to the soldiers with our terms." Thomas stepped forward respectfully. "Chief Running Bear, I believe our chances would be better if you came with us to speak directly to the army officers." Murmurs of concern spread through the tribe, but Running Bear silenced them with a gesture. "I will go, and my son will accompany me." He looked pointedly at Yellow Wolf. "It is time he learns how to fight with words as well as weapons." As preparations were made for the delegation, Morning Dove approached Sarah privately. "You have a strong spirit, teacher woman," the elderly Apache said with approval. "Few would stand before Yellow Wolf without trembling." Sarah smiled warmly. "I was terrified, but sometimes courage is simply having no other choice." "You will return to teach our children?" Morning Dove asked. "If your people will allow it, yes," Sarah promised. "Education builds bridges where none existed before." The old woman nodded sagely. "Little Hawk sees this truth in you. I see how he watches you." Sarah blushed, glancing toward Thomas, who was deep in conversation with Running Bear. "We've been through much together in a short time. Such trials reveal the true person within," Morning Dove said, pressing something into Sarah's hand, a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "For protection on your journey ahead." Together, before Sarah could thank her, it was time to depart. The small delegation, Thomas, Sarah, Running Bear, Yellow Wolf, and 2 elder warriors, mounted their horses and rode toward the cavalry's position. The setting sun cast their elongated shadows before them like harbingers of their approach. Lieutenant Foster and his men had established a makeshift camp on the valley floor. Their expressions betrayed surprise at seeing the Apache leaders approaching voluntarily. "This is unexpected," Foster remarked to Thomas as they dismounted. "I hope it's a good sign." "It's an opportunity," Thomas replied. "One we can't afford to waste." The lieutenant ordered his men to stand down, but remain vigilant as he led the delegation to his tent. Inside, maps of the territory were spread across a folding table, marked with the locations of recent conflicts. "Chief Running Bear wishes to discuss terms that will benefit both his people and the U.S. government," Thomas began, translating as the conversation progressed. What followed was a tense but productive negotiation. Running Bear spoke with the wisdom of his years, while Yellow Wolf's fierce interventions actually strengthened their position, showing the army officer that concessions were necessary to prevent the younger warriors from breaking away to form raiding parties. Sarah contributed unexpected insights about the educational needs of the Apache children, proposing a school that would respect their culture while teaching them skills to navigate the changing world. "The children are the future," she said passionately. "If we give them the tools to build understanding between our peoples, we create a foundation for lasting peace." As night fell completely, lanterns were lit inside the tent. The negotiations continued for hours, with Thomas translating tirelessly. Finally, a framework agreement was reached. The Apache would relocate to a reservation with better water access than previously offered. The army would provide promised supplies on a regular schedule, and Sarah would establish a school that Apache children could attend voluntarily. "We'll need the colonel's approval," Foster cautioned, "but I believe he'll see the wisdom in this approach, especially with Miss Montgomery's school as part of the agreement." Yellow Wolf remained skeptical. "Words on paper mean nothing if not honored, which is why I'm requesting permission to stay as a liaison between your people and the fort," Thomas said, surprising everyone, including himself. He glanced at Sarah. "With Miss Montgomery's school nearby, I could ensure the terms are upheld on both sides. Running Bear nodded approvingly. Little Hawk has walked in both worlds. He can help us navigate this new path. As they prepared to return to their respective camps for the night, with plans to formalize the agreement in the morning, Sarah pulled Thomas aside. "Did you mean that?" she asked quietly. "About staying?" Thomas looked into her blue eyes, finding himself momentarily at a loss for words. "I've spent years moving between worlds, never fully belonging to either," he admitted. "But these past days with you, I've begun to see the possibility of building something permanent." Sarah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I came west to make a difference, to build bridges through education. I never expected to find someone who shares that vision so completely. It won't be easy," he cautioned. "The reservation, the school, there will be challenges from both sides." "The worthwhile things rarely are easy," she replied, her hand finding his. "But I believe we're stronger together than apart." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a new day full of promise. As the delegation returned to the Apache camp with Lieutenant Foster to share the terms with the entire tribe, Thomas and Sarah rode side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The tribe received the news with mixed emotions: relief that bloodshed had been avoided, concern about the changes ahead, hope for better conditions than other tribes had received. Morning Dove watched approvingly as Thomas and Sarah stood together, presenting a united vision of cooperation. "The school will welcome all children," Sarah explained through Thomas's translation. "We will teach reading and writing in English, but also preserve your stories and traditions." Little Bird, the girl who had helped them escape, pushed forward eagerly. "Will you teach us about the stars and numbers too?" Sarah knelt to meet the child's eyes. "Everything you wish to learn. The knowledge of both worlds will be yours." In the weeks that followed, the agreement was formalized and preparations began for the tribe's relocation. Thomas worked tirelessly with both the Army and the Apache to ensure fair treatment during the transition. Yellow Wolf, to everyone's surprise, became instrumental in keeping the young warriors in line. His fierce loyalty transferred from war preparations to protecting the tribe's interests in negotiations. Sarah began gathering materials for her school, writing to contacts in Boston for books and supplies. A small building was constructed at the edge of the reservation, its windows facing both the Apache dwellings and the distant settlement of Willow Creek, symbolic of its position bridging two worlds. On the evening before the school's official opening, Thomas found Sarah arranging desks in the simple classroom. Sunset light streamed through the western windows, illuminating her face as she worked. "Tomorrow's the big day," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Are you nervous?" She looked up with a smile that still took his breath away. "Terribly," and excited beyond words. Thomas crossed the room to help her with a particularly heavy desk. "Running Bear asked me to tell you that 15 children will attend tomorrow, including Little Bird. That's more than we expected for the first day. And Yellow Wolf? He's agreed to come speak to the older children about Apache history once a week." Thomas chuckled. "I never would have believed it possible a month ago." Sarah straightened, brushing dust from her skirt. "People can change when given reason and opportunity, even the most hardened hearts." "You've certainly changed me," Thomas said softly, taking her hands in his. "I was a drifter, Sarah, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Always between worlds but belonging to neither. And now?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Now I've found where I belong. If you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. It was my mother's. Somehow Morning Dove saved it all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Thomas continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah Montgomery, will you build this bridge between worlds with me? As my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. "1,000 times yes." As they embraced in the warm glow of sunset, Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. Captivity that had led to freedom of the most profound kind. Outside the window, the first evening star appeared over the mountains, a silent witness to new beginnings. The next morning, as Apache children filed into the schoolhouse for the first time, Thomas and Sarah stood together at the door, welcoming each one by name. Running Bear and Mourning Dove watched from a respectful distance, the elderly woman nodding with satisfaction. "The Apache have a saying," Thomas told Sarah as the last child entered. "Life is a circle that turns forever." Perhaps this is how healing begins, not with grand gestures but with small circles of understanding that grow wider with each generation. Sarah squeezed his hand, her engagement ring catching the morning light. "Then let's begin," she said, stepping into the classroom where eager young faces waited to build a future none of them could have imagined just weeks before, a future founded on respect, understanding, and love that had flourished against all odds in the wild Arizona territory.